It was an unusually hot summer afternoon when I asked my nephew to help me work on the land. I had inherited the property from my father, a vast expanse of untamed earth that held decades of memories within its soil. My father had loved the land, but after his passing, it had been neglected. Overgrown weeds, fallen branches, and the relentless sun had taken their toll. I had always promised myself I'd make the time to take care of it, but life had a way of getting in the way. That day, as the sun beat down, I could feel the tension building inside me. It wasn't just the labor of the land that weighed on me. There was something else, something I had been struggling to put into words. My nephew, Alex, was only 19, but he had always been like a son to me. His father, my brother, had been out of the picture for most of his life, and I had taken it upon myself to guide him as best as I could. As we worked, pulling weeds and turning the soil, I watched him. He had grown into a strong young man, his hands rough from labor, his muscles straining under the weight of the work. I could see so much of myself in him, but there was something different about him now. A distance had grown between us, a silence that neither of us seemed to know how to break. "Alex," I finally said, wiping the sweat from my brow, "we need to talk." He glanced up at me, his face shadowed by the brim of his baseball cap, but he didn't respond. He just kept working, as if he hadn't heard me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew had to be said. "I've been hearing things about you and Sarah." The moment her name left my lips, I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? I wasn't sure, but it was enough to confirm what I had suspected for weeks now. Sarah was my wife. We had been married for almost 10 years, but lately things had been strained. We fought more than we talked, and when we did talk, it felt like we were strangers to one another. I had convinced myself it was just a rough patch, that we would work through it like we always did. But then, I started noticing the way Alex and Sarah interacted, the way they laughed together, the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. It had started as a gut feeling, an intuition I couldn't shake. But then I saw the texts. They weren't explicit, not at first, just casual conversations. But there was an undertone there, something more than just friendly banter. And then, late one night, I had overheard a conversation between them. It was brief, a whispered exchange in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. There was something going on between them, something I couldn't ignore any longer. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alex said, his voice low and defensive. He still wasn't looking at me, his hands gripping the handle of the shovel tightly. "Don't lie to me, Alex," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've seen the way you two act around each other. I've seen the messages. I know something's going on." For a moment, he didn't say anything. The only sound was the rustle of the wind through the trees and the rhythmic thud of the shovel as he continued working. But then he stopped, the shovel still in the ground, and he finally turned to face me. "She's lonely," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. She told me you don't love her anymore." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I clenched my fists, trying to control the anger that was bubbling up inside me. "She told you that?" I asked, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. He nodded, his eyes downcast. "She said you're always working, always distant. She said she feels like she's alone in the marriage." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand to know why he hadn't come to me, why he hadn't told me about this sooner. But another part of me felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal, not just from Sarah, but from Alex too. I had trusted him. I had taken him under my wing, tried to teach him what it meant to be a man, to be responsible in this. This was how he repaid me? "You're my nephew, Alex," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "I trusted you." He didn't respond. He just stood there, his head hanging low, the weight of his guilt evident in his posture. "I don't know what's worse," I continued, my voice rising with anger. "The fact that you went behind my back with my wife, or the fact that you let me believe everything was fine while you were sneaking around with her." "It wasn't like that," he said quickly, his eyes flashing with desperation. "I swear, Uncle John, it wasn't. We didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. How long, I asked, my voice cold. How long has this been going on? He hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. 3 months, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 months. 3 months of lies, of deceit, of betrayal. I felt sick to my stomach, the weight of it all crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the length of time they had been sneaking around behind my back, it was too much to bear. Without thinking, I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, pulling him close so that we were eye to eye. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I growled, my voice shaking with fury. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," I snapped, shoving him away from me. "You both did." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of the situation hanging heavy between us. I could see the regret in his eyes, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. There was no going back from this. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. I didn't have an answer for him. How could I? My life had been turned upside down in the span of a few minutes. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had built with Sarah, was crumbling around me, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hollow. "I don't know what happens next." We finished the rest of the work in silence. The once therapeutic task of working on the land now felt like a chore, a burden that weighed heavily on my soul. Every time I looked at Alex, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. He had betrayed me, just like Sarah had. The two people I trusted most in this world had gone behind my back and done the unthinkable. That night, when I returned to the house, Sarah was waiting for me. She must have sensed that something was wrong, because the moment I walked through the door, she looked up at me with wide, fearful eyes. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaky. I didn't respond. Instead, I just stared at her, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to ask. "How could you do this to me?" "Why, Alex? Was any of it real?" "I talked to Alex," I said finally, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. She paled at the mention of his name, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "John, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear you try to justify what you did." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. The woman I had once loved, the woman I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with, had shattered my trust in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why Alex? Why my nephew, of all people?" She looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know," she whispered. "It just happened." "That's not good enough," I said, my anger flaring. "You don't just accidentally fall into an affair with someone. There's a choice there, Sarah, a decision. And you made it." "I was lonely," she said, her voice desperate. "You've been so distant, so focused on work. I didn't feel like you cared about me anymore." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "So your solution was to cheat on me with my nephew?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she repeated, her voice pleading. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice cold. "And now we have to live with that." For the next few days we barely spoke. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, was now silent, the tension between us palpable. Alex didn't come around anymore, and I didn't reach out to him. I couldn't. The wound was too fresh, too raw. I spent most of my time on the land, trying to find solace in the physical labor, but it didn't help. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of what I had lost, of the betrayal that had torn my life apart. In the end, I knew there was no fixing what had been broken. Sarah and I separated, and Alex moved away, cutting off all contact. The land, once a symbol of my family's legacy, now felt like a burden I no longer wanted to carry. But the truth is, some wounds never fully heal. They fade with time, But the scars remain, a constant reminder of the pain and the betrayal that changed everything. And as much as I tried to move on, there was always a part of me that wondered what could have been, if only things had been different.